Creating molds using Easy Mold, silicone putty, and organics can create really interesting textures on your resin and clay when you use them. So let me show you how easy this is to do. You're going to want to select pull out some balls of equal size of the part A and part B of the silicone putty. I have those equal sized balls right here. You can start out with this, using this leaf first. You have about 3 minutes before this putty starts to set up, and it will no longer allow you to make an impression, so you have to work fairly quickly. Go ahead and mix the two parts together until they are fully blended. You'll see no marbling in the putty at all. Once it's fully blended, go ahead and create a nice round ball. And using the top of the silicone putty, I like to use this surface right here, press down on the putty and create a nice round flat disc. You want it to still be about that thick, but depending on what you're making the mold with, like if it was a pine cone or something, you'd want to have it thicker. The texture on the back side of the leaf has more detail, so I'm going to press that down into the wet putty and then press again, making that nice and flat. Remove it off of the lid and lay it down onto a piece of plastic or a Ziploc bag and let that set. It'll take about 20 minutes until it's hard. While the mold is setting up, let's set that aside and go ahead and start some of the next steps. Preparing this, we're going to want to use a little bit of rubbing alcohol and clean out the insides and the surface of the open back bezels. The bezels are cast in a lead-free pewter, and then they're plated with 0.999 fine silver, 24 karat gold, and copper. And then we oxidize them to kind of give them an antique look, and that really shows up nicely when it's a recessed area. But on these pieces we don't need to have any of that blackening on there, and the blackening can come off of the bezel and discolor the resin, or when I bring the resin, the clear resin, over the surface right here, I'll be able to see that blackening. So I'm just taking a little bit of time and cleaning all my bezels until all of the oxidization is released from there. Let's use these three. The next step we're going to use some of the Nunn design resin and mix this up. So we have a part A and a part B. I like to have a piece of plastic down on my table first. I'll lay that down. I have a mixing cup and mixing paddle. I use this side, and so I let it dry. Now I can use this side. And we'll need our timer. So I have a little timer handy and ready to go. So first we're going to take the part A, and we're going to fill up the resin cup to the 1 tablespoon mark. And we're going to want to be very precise with the amount that we put in, because it needs to be a 1-to-1 ratio. So I like to get down next to the cup so I can see exactly when I hit that mark of where it hit that line, because the resin is very sensitive. If it's not an exact mix of 1:1, the resin will not harden correctly. So I'm just drizzling in the resin until I hit that line, and as I start to get really close to it, I kind of lighten up the pour, and right when I hit that line of where I know I'm right at that 1 tablespoon mark, I turn the bottle slightly and stop the pour, and then use a wet wipe to wipe away that excess resin on the lid. So that's the A, and you always pour part A in first, and then with part B you're going to fill up to the 2 tablespoon mark. Same thing, get down eye level so I can see that line and know exactly when I hit it. When I start getting close to that line, I ease up on my pour and then turn the bottle and then clean off the lid area. Now you'll need 2 minutes of mixing. So go ahead and start the timer for 2 minutes, and then using stick. It's a really full cup, that's why I like to mix this on plastic. When it first starts mixing together, it'll kind of be a little bit milky, and then as it blends together, it'll turn clear. Scrape the sides as you go along, and then scrape the stick itself. And continue to stir for another 2 minutes. Once the putty is hard, it'll be firm like that, and you can just kind of peel back the side edges of the organics and release it. And then you have your mold and you're ready to go. Alright, now we have our molds that we made out of organic using the Easy Mold silicone putty. We have our Nunn design resin that we've mixed and let sit for quite some time until it's gotten really thick. And we have our open back bezels that we used some rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip to clean away any of the oxidization. I want to show you one more thing that you can do. So going back to the finished piece, you can add a little bit of Pearl-X powder down into the grooves of your pad if you want to, onto your mold, just to give it a little bit more texture. So let me show you real quick how to do that. So I have my mold. I'm using a little bit of the Pearl-X powder and a Q-tip. So you just put a little bit of the powder onto the Q-tip, and you can see down there's all kinds of little crevices down in there. That's where I really want my Pearl-X powder to be, is down into those crevices. Then once you have them, that Pearl-X powder pushed down into the crevices with the Q-tip, go ahead and use a wet wipe to wipe away any excess that's not down in the crevices. So I'm just, all of that excess that's on the surface here, I'm just wiping it away so that it doesn't show up on the resin. You have that clear resin except for down in those crevices. All right, so that's an extra little tip of what you can do with some Pearl X powders. And you have your molds that you made with the organics, and you have your frames. So you design where you want you can place them where you want the designs to be. So I like it. There's the stem of the leaf there, stem of the leaf there, and for this one, I'll lay it down about right here. So now I have our 3 molds. Then let's just double check how we are doing with our resin here. This is really thick, and the cup is getting warm to the touch. So this is ideal for this. So let's just start with one. Let's start with this one right here first. Take a little bit of your resin and drizzle it down. So I like to rotate the stir stick back and forth, and that helps, see, there's lots of little stringies that happen because the resin is getting so thick, that when you rotate around the stir stick, it breaks that string and makes it so that you don't have a bunch of resin strings all over, and it gets all over the side edge of the bezel. So I poured a little bit into there, and then with a toothpick, go into the piece and press and move around that resin into those side areas along the bezel. So one of the reasons you want your resin to be really thick is that it will make it so that it doesn't seep out from underneath the bezel. And I like to go along the edge of the bezel, the inside edge there, because it's really easy for air to get caught into those side edges, and bubbles will start to come to the surface. So now I'm going to use my toothpick to roll on some resin onto my toothpick and then add it in there. Roll, so I'm breaking the string and placing it into the bezel, going along those side edges in hopes of releasing any air that might get trapped. Oh, see a little string there? Okay, let's set this one aside and let it, it'll start to kind of flow and flatten out. We'll move on to the next one. So rotating my stir stick so that I can pick up some of that resin and place it in. This stuff is really, it's not too thick, so it's still maneuverable, but it's pretty thick. And it needs to be this thick, otherwise it will seep out from underneath. And I'll show you later on when we release it from the mold, how to remove some of that seepage if it did indeed happen. So this is a great technique for that extra resin that you just didn't get to, or the toothpick to go in and actually have some resin on my finger, so rotating to break that string on there. I'm going to wipe the resin off that's on my fingers. I always have a little thing of wet wipes at the ready, and I actually use a different toothpick. Just go in and move that down into this point area. Going along that edge to see if there's any air trapped down in there. When the resin starts to get really thick like this, it doesn't have much of an opportunity for it to off-gas the resin itself, so the air bubbles can very easily get stuck inside of the resin, and that's just kind of par for the course on this particular technique. It just really, it's a really cool look, but bubbles very easily can happen. Now I am using my toothpick to go in and add additional resin to my piece and bringing it up until it's pretty much flush to that side edge. You could go ahead and dome it if you wanted to. Making sure I have resin down in that point. And now we're ready to do the third one. In about 6 hours, this will be firm enough to release it from the mold. So here's the tricky part, is when you get it stuck, your fingers stuck on the bezel. That's why it's a good idea. Make sure that you're wiping your hands so that you don't have that resin on your fingers and getting it stuck. Or you can use multiple toothpicks to hold the bezel in place while you pour the resin in. If you get some of the resin on the sides of the bezel, you can see I have a little bit over here on this side. We'll be able to get that off once it's in its soft cure phase. All right, I'll go ahead and drizzle a little bit more into this one and bring that up until it's nice and flush. And let me show you another little trick. The resin is really thick and it's going to continue to off gas, so you're going to want to watch it, but at some point it's just going to be too late. The bubbles will be trapped in there. But if you have any bubbles on the surface, you can use your hot breath and just kind of huff on it. I'm going to take it off the camera and huff. So I'm exhaling right onto the piece, and it will help any bubbles that are rising up to the surface, like in this area right over here. Just use your hot breath to blow on them. And if it doesn't work, you can take your toothpick and kind of try to agitate them and pop them, but at some point this is going to get so thick you're not going to be able to do anything about it except for embrace them. All right, so now we have our resin in our bezels and we're going to let that sit for 6 hours. All right, let's see if these are ready. I already tested a little bit right there, and you can see that I can peel back the edges on these. And I'm just moving all the way around on the edge. You can see I have a couple little dimples there. That's when the resin starts getting really thick and it's off-gassing, and it'll get to that surface and it'll just kind of create a little bit of a crater. And that is the front surface on that. It's still not cured, so I'm going to go ahead and place it on a piece of plastic as it continues to harden. And on this, You can see the same little bubbles, little craters in the resin. Just pull back the mold. And just pop right out of there. That's number 2. And there was a little bit of seepage on both of these, so we're going to go ahead and trim those while they're in this soft cure stage. Not a lot of bubbles, but there are a lot of dents. Oh, you can see those. Actually, there are some fun looking bubbles inside of there. Alright, so once you're released out, you can see how that design showed up in the resin. The next step is going to be if you have any overhang of the resin. This one didn't really seep out any, but this here did. You can see that this is on the edge. This is still a little bit sticky, but let's go ahead and trim this up. So I'm just using a pair of flush set cutters and going along right on that edge and just slightly trimming the resin. This is a very irregular look, so precision is not required. A little more tricky up in this area. One. That looks pretty good. There's a little spot down here. And there we have it. We'll let those continue to set up and cure for the next 24 hours, and then we will be good.